What is up, fight fans? I am Jason Burgos for Sportsnaut.com, and I'm here to look back at the results of UFC London from July 23rd and the possible fallout from the event that originated in the United Kingdom. Of course, you got to start off at the top. That is the main event, Curtis Blaydes versus Tom Aspinall, a highly anticipated heavyweight fight between two talented heavyweights, the two younger heavyweights too. Unfortunately, it ends really disappointingly with Tom Aspinall maybe possibly injuring his knee, maybe a ligament tear, something terrible. He pulls up lame early in the fight, I think like 16 seconds long, and just gives a result that is overwhelmingly frustrating for fight fans and for both fighters because they put so much work in, so much to gain from victories for either guy, and neither of them get any of that. So the question now is what happens with the Curtis Blaydes from here? He doesn't get the win that he really could have used to possibly get himself into a title shot or interim title shot or in that position to really be a serious contender. So what happens next? For me, possibly the winner of the Tai Tuivasa versus Cyril Gane fight that's coming up in France soon. That would make a lot of sense if he gets that person next. They're both high-level contenders. An argument could be made they probably deserve a title shot over him. But if that doesn't happen and Francis Ngannou is still far away from coming back, that might make a lot of sense. Or Derek Lewis is coming up. He's fighting at UFC 277. Maybe if he wins, a rematch between those two makes a lot of sense next for Derek Lewis. Maybe he gets himself back into a contender conversation with the win against Sergey Pavlovich and then fighting Curtis Blaydes and maybe being him. Maybe Curtis Blaydes, if he's not going to get a title shot, a chance to avenge that loss against Derek Lewis would appeal to him. But how about Tom Aspinall? What happens with Tom Aspinall after this disappointing setback? He's on his record. It's listed as a loss. I don't think it should be. It's accidental. It's injury. It's a frustrating situation. But speaking of Gane Tuivasa, maybe the loser of that fight, there's still going to be a highly ranked fighter, still a big name in the division. Maybe Tom Aspinall gets that fighter, or maybe someone like Jair Jr. Rosenstruik. Maybe where Tom Aspinall is at later in the year, maybe he doesn't even come back in 2022 based on this injury. If he has to fight in 2023, early 2023, maybe Jairzinho Rosenstruik. That makes a lot of sense, mattering where Jairzinho Rosenstruik's career is, say that name 3 times fast, is at that point. Moving on from the main event, co-main event, Jack Hermansson versus Chris Curtis. Not a very interesting fight. Workman-like effort for Jack Hermansson. He was clearly the better fighter. It was odd to me that it was such a close fight in terms of odds makers. Chris Curtis got a lot of credit for the hot streak he was on. He had won 8 fights in a row up until this fight, but I don't think he should have been even close to even a serious betting choice in the fight. Hermansson wins. Where he goes from here, he's lost. He's alternated wins and losses in his last 7 fights. So he's a guy that's really not in contendership. He's still a very legit top 10 level middleweight. This was supposed to be him versus Darren Till in the main event of this big London card. Till, of course, could not make the fight. Injuries, whatnot. I still think you should just make the fight. I know Hermansson has been very iffy on making that fight again. That's the fight I think that probably should happen. If not that fight, maybe someone like Andre Muniz, who's a rising really good, talented grappler star in the division. Maybe that's the perfect test to prove that he's top 10 level, and also a perfect test for Jack Hermansson to prove that he's still very relevant and can keep down these rising stars and keep his spot within the division. Going on from there, the story of the card was Paddy Pimblett. That was the guy most people were looking for. Everybody was excited to see. Did really good numbers on Sportsnaut for Paddy Pimblett related stuff, and he gets another win and another finish. Now 3 fights in the UFC, 3 finishes. Jordan Levitt gave us a solid effort, showed some good resistance early by trying to grapple with Paddy Pimblett and force it to the ground. Wasn't able to really do that for any sustained amount of time. In the end, you could feel the momentum shift. Paddy Pimblett takes into the second round, gets it in an advantageous position, gets his back, gets submission in round 2, rear naked choke. Is he for real? Paddy Pimblett is a talented fighter, and I feel if he wasn't using so much time to cut weight in his camps, he could be even better. He is a legit young talent. Is he going to be the lightweight champion? I don't know. Let's not get too ahead of ourselves there, but he beat 3 solid UFC level opponents. Next, he really needs to continue this development step forward and another fighter who's maybe a more of a challenge, or the way the UFC likes to do things, especially since he's such a big name now and he's likely to be on a pay-per-view next time he competes. They might go with someone that's an established name, but maybe not at their peak anymore. Perfect example, Clay Guida. Clay Guida, I can totally see him being against a Paddy Pimblett, where he's a name. A lot of fans love Clay Guida, but he's nowhere near the fighter he once was. Paddy gets a win, a big name on his resume, a big American name on his resume, and that's a meaningful deal. Another example would be Jim Miller, who's on a bit of a hot streak lately. He's still pretty good for a fighter of his age, but again, nice developmental test, but not too far of a jump ahead. If you don't want to go with those more older gray beard names, Matt Frivola, he called for the fight after the show. That would make a lot of sense. He's a nice, solid, good lightweight who's a little bit better than maybe the likes of Levitt and Kuzula Vargas and these kind of guys. So that would make a lot of sense. But either way, Paddy Pimblett's here to stay. He's a big name. He's the biggest star in the UK in terms of fighters. And if you don't like it, get used to it because he ain't going anywhere. Moving on from that, one of the other major stories on the card was Alexander Gustafsson, who was also on the main card versus Nikita Krylov, loses in the first round by knockout. And it's a stunning thing because a guy like Alexander Gustafsson 5 years ago would have just trucked and ran through a guy like Nikita Krylov, who lost at the UFC London card in March to Paul Craig. So that's how far Alexander Gustafsson has fallen. That a guy like Nikita Krylov hurt him, stunned him, finished him. Fully, Gustafsson is not anywhere near the fighter he was. He's lost 4 straight now. All finishes, 2 submission, 2 by knockout. He's lost 6 of his last 7. And this is coming off of 2 years away that he missed 2 years and came back to MMA, came back to UFC. He's only 35, but this is a man who previously retired in 2019. He's already gotten to a point in his life where he clearly felt he didn't need UFC, he didn't need MMA. He came back, like when you're already at the stage, you're only 35 and going through this kind of a losing streak. He's been through some utter wars. Of course, everybody knows the John Jones fight, but a lot of people forget his fight against Daniel Cormier, which is another great light heavyweight title fight that was a war too. He isn't the fighter. He really should retire again, avoid further damage of the perils of CTE that can happen even beyond just concussions. Just set yourself up for a more healthy life. And Alexander Gustafsson, you've done so much. You've been a great fighter, one of the best light heavyweights of the last 10, 15 years. But it's better off that he retire and move on with his career. The other notable notes from the event in London, Molly McCann, another win. This is her 3rd straight. She gets another win in London twice this year using a spinning back elbow to set up the finish or get the finish against Hannah Goldie. She's not ranked yet. I thought maybe she could break into the flyweight rankings, which isn't a super strong division for the women's side of things. But either way, she needs a ranked opponent next. She's earned it. She's got some good wins. She's got so-so losses, but one of her losses is Tyler Santos, who almost beat Valentina Shevchenko. So she's a legit fighter. She deserves it. I prefer these 3 fights, all of them at the back end of the 15. Man, Hibas, be a really fun, interesting fight, stand-up fight. Tracy Cortez, the wifey of Brian Ortega, or Erin Blanchfield. Erin Blanchfield, young fighter, very talented grappler. That clash of styles, striker versus grappler, that'd be very, very interesting. That's the fight I hope for of the most. And moving on from that, last note from the UFC London results, Volkan Ozdemir shuts down Paul Craig. As I mentioned before, he fought Nikita Krylov for the last event, won by submission. He shut down a sub game, ends his 6-fight unbeaten streak. And in the end, it kind of happened. What happened with thought. Well, the result was what we thought might happen. Volkan Ozdemir is still a very high-level light heavyweight. His losses are only to elite guys. Even though the betting odds were close, Paul Craig's on fire. He's kind of a one-trick pony. Very talented trick. Very good grappler. Very crafty. But if you're smart enough and talented enough to kind of stay out of danger and play defensive game and get a standing, he hasn't evolved his game enough standing to where he's a threat. And that's the thing. If he can evolve his game to where he's a threat standing, Paul Craig's a dangerous fighter, but he's just not there yet, and he's just not elite yet. Unfortunately for him, but for Volkan Ozdemir keeps him in that relevancy level in the top 10, and he still remains a dangerous fighter. He's a serious litmus test for any fighter who's trying to make their way up in the division. And that is my look back at UFC London.